Welcome back to CC with Moxie. I'm E. I'm a homeschool mama in Northeast Georgia, and I've got one of my good friends here today. This is Lauren. Say hello, Lauren.
Hello.
Lauren and I kind of fell in love early. I moved to the area, 8-ish years ago.
Yes.
And Lauren was already a tutor. And she reached
It was
out.
my second year.
Was it?
It was my second year doing CC.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh yeah. And she reached out and said, "You're new to the area, let's have coffee." And she met me for coffee, and she found out I was moving from Florida. She brought me a scarf for the winter and everything. I was like, "You're my people." So
It's
welcome
very
to Lauren.
cold comparatively. I guess that winter was cold enough. You needed a short scarf.
I needed a scarf. But kind of tell the audience how long you've been doing CC, kind of your role.
Yeah, so we've been doing CC for 9 years. This will be our 10th year starting in August. So exciting. We've loved it. It's been wonderful. You know, I used to be a school teacher in a classroom, and it's so different. It's like homeschooling in the wild. So I have 4 children. When we started, Hobie was 4. So he's been through all the different foundations levels and getting ready to go into Challenge A. And then my second one is Johnny, and he actually started at 3 years and 11 months. That was a little too early. I don't recommend it. So started 4, obviously. And then I was pregnant with Bo, my first year of tutoring. And then Caroline is in between Johnny and Bo. And yeah, so
She's going into first year essentials.
Yeah, I was right. So our community opened the first year that Hobie did it, and I was on my way driving somewhere, and the director of the time, Jessica Robertson, said, "Hey, do you want to be a tutor?" And I said, "Oh, great! I just found out I'm pregnant again. We can tutor. That's fine." But it was really nerve-wracking. But the Lord provided, and there was a lot to learn in the first year, and even now I'm still learning more. But that's the point of CC, is being a lifelong learner and treasuring God's truth.
Yes. And the reason I brought Lauren on today is I have a couple people in my life, not a couple, there's a lot of you out there, that used to be public or private school teachers. And I call them my favorite Reformed teachers because they found CC, which is very different than that sort of classroom arrangement. And they are now soaring. So I thought, hey, I'm going to bring her on today. We're going to talk about her journey that led her to homeschooling, the differences between a standard classroom education that most of us got versus CC. And she's going to be honest. We're authentic people, if you haven't figured that out. She's going to tell you about some of the struggles she had with that transition, but then a lot of the fruits that she's seen since. So you ready to dive in?
Yes. So,
one of my favorite Reformed teachers.
To give you an explanation of when I taught school, I went to Auburn University, and I was an elementary education major. And right out of school, I got a job in Gwinnett County and taught at a Title I school, which is kind of really hard. If you don't know what that is, it's more than 75 reduced free lunch, which means a lot of families in poverty. And so it was also the year Katrina hit. So to say I was wet behind the ears is an understatement. Didn't really know what I was doing. So we tried, and I love the children that I taught, and I work with my assistant principal and the reading specialist, and still it was a lot. So I actually took a little break from being a classroom teacher, and then the Lord had a plan that I would go, and 6 months later on the mission field to a school in Tanzania, on the East Coast, kind of by Zanzibar, and teach school at a British missionary school, which is different because in the way that, I guess, missionary school, it's not standardized by the government, so you have a little bit more freedom, but also it's more formal because it was a private school that the local people paid to go to, and the missionaries could go for a discounted rate. Then I came back to the States, and I worked for Charlotte Mecklenburg schools, and I taught the upper grades. And it was interesting because it was an IB-PYP school, which means basically that we did unit-based teaching and based on questions. So it was a research-based, and that's different. So some of it is a blessing that I was able to go
But
through
based
that.
on questions. That's very CC. Okay.
Yes. And so, let's see, and then finished up and had Hobie. And so since I've had children, I've stayed home with them and, just shared life, right?
So, talking about sharing life, we've literally, our husbands, our friends, we hang out sometimes. We watch elections together.
Yes.
And I know that your husband played a role in your journey to decide to homeschool. In a nutshell, kind of what led you to homeschooling?
Okay. Yeah, great question. So I went through go back to it. We were both homeschooled. I went to public school, my local neighborhood elementary school up until 4th grade. Then in 5th grade, I was homeschooled, which was amazing. I grew so much as a reader. I actually learned how to read about history, and I taught myself math, which is like before I wouldn't even do my math homework. So being homeschooled gave me so much opportunity to learn on my own, and then also my parents the opportunity to focus on my weaknesses and strengthen them. And then the next year I went to private school, and it was a wonderful school. I went through middle school and high school, and learned a lot about the Bible and just incredible truths I still use to today. And then I went to Auburn University, which I said before. My husband, so he was homeschooled. He was, held back for kindergarten. He was a busy little boy. He grew up in the low country, so he was always out playing with his dog in the water and shrimping and boating, and so there was a lot to do. And so his mom was a teacher herself, and so she talks about him reading upside down and spelling upside down, so you can do it if you have a busy kid. And then she decided to go back to teaching when he was in 3rd grade. So he did that, but he always wished he could be homeschooled again. And so when we were dating, he said, I really want, my children to be homeschooled. And we were engaged. It came to, I want our children to be homeschooled. And then it was, we had children. And then he said, well, our children are not going to go to preschool, which is a big surprise for me because I was like, I need a break.
She's like me. We both had 4 children in under 5 years. And so preschool kind of sounded tempting.
Yes. It's like, is it time yet? Is it time? But we'll talk about in a second how that went. So we prayed about it, and the Lord really, I had a weekend just at my in-laws' house just praying, and nobody was really there, and so I got complete quiet, and I was able to research and really pray and rest and think and evaluate what was important to me, and then how the Lord was leading. And so really found Apostle Conversations online, and I compared in our area of town. There are tons of hybrids, tons of variations of homeschool, very high end, very approachable and affordable. And so what we found was that CC was the best fit for us, and it was nearby. It wasn't that far to drive to the campus where we are. And it was just so exciting to be able to kind of okay, my kids are old enough to get back into this again. But it was still a lot of adjusting as far as I was used to certain things.
So let's go there. And we are not by any means saying that this is the only way or other options aren't great, but there are differences and similarities between public school or private Christian, whatever, a classroom setting versus classical education through CC. What do you think some of the biggest differences are between the two?
Yeah, well, I think with many classrooms out there, public and private, are very still kind of humanist and secular in a sense of yes, you teach the Bible, but it's still very much of the secular framework philosophy of education. And so if you go back in history, you kind of learn about how that is. But with going to practicums with CC, I've really learned that going through the trivium, and it's really beautiful how it all comes together. It's very aligns with child development. One of my favorite courses in college was child development and human philosophy. And so you can see how each design of the grammar stage and dialectic stage and the rhetoric stage fits the human development, how God designed it. And does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then obviously, if you don't know, we might have some watchers out there that have never been to a CC. CC classes are small. We usually only have 8. Occasionally you might see a 9th and a 12-year-old or under class. And then for challenge levels, we max it at 12 because it's biblically based. Lee Bortons has said, if Jesus could disciple 12 well, that is our cutoff. He didn't go further than 12. Mm-hmm. Do you see a difference between, I think what you were hinting at a little bit before when you said secular, that you might have a Bible class at your Christian school. The way CC does it is God is integrated into every single strand. And then every single strand, we're trying to make connections. So maybe we're learning something in chemistry one week, but it's using math principles. So we're going to discuss those math principles while doing science. We might be reading a book, maybe Johnny Tremaine, and so we're also going to talk about history and what else was going on in the world at that time and how God used some of these characters in that. So with classical education, we're trying to bring...
You kind of integrate all the subjects together and complement them.
Yes.
Right.
Whereas in the public, correct me if I'm wrong, you have teachers
more. It depends on the teacher, because I was more integrated. So when I taught 5th grade, I learned that for my students to do well, because it is based on testing, right? Your AP is there, and she's saying, this is what I expect you to do as far as test scores. This is who your 5th grade team. This is what you're all working together. And sometimes you have to do the same thing, the same week, and it's just very constricting. But what I decided to do in my reading instruction is small group instruction, where I would poll certain students and I would, based on their spelling ability, and then we would go over nonfiction things like science and history rather than just the basal reader. So there is some liberty in that, but in the same way, in a 5th grade classroom, you're going to have kids who are, up to 30 kids. So usually I had like around 20, but up to 30 kids, and they're all on different levels. I had kids reading at a college level, brilliant kids who I gave independently, okay, you're ready to study Latin and Greek, please move on. And then here's this kid who hasn't really passed 2nd grade reading, and I don't know if he's going to because of IQ. And that's another thing, as far as there are all different kinds of children, and a lot of children, their gifts and talents keep them from being successful in public school, because they're not able to, or any kind of traditional school, because they're limited on the behavior and the schedule and the setup. And so I love that about being a homeschool mom and teacher, because there's so much liberty. You can get to the sweet spot of your student and how they learn. So what I learned to do was differentiate, which is basically a term that means you find out how your kids are. And we'll talk about this probably more, but teaching multiple children at the same time, how do you do that? And in a kind of one schoolroom, one schoolhouse.
Yes, one room schoolhouse.
One room schoolhouse.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. I remember going on this field trip in 5th grade, and we went to this farm, and we went to this old barn. It was like the simulated schoolhouse, and they were giving me this huge long division, and I just thought, I'm never coming to this place ever again. It was so defeating. But you don't want that for your children. You want to be able to help them be successful where they are. And so studying the same subject, like we do by cycle, so say ancient history, you're going to be giving your older kids a novel on ancient history. You're going to be giving your younger kids maybe a pocket folder to coloring sheets. And so that really helped me respect the individual in my classroom, but then keep them moving on along as they could be successful.
That's awesome. And that's very classical. We are more worried about the whole student, and not just, we're not hiring physics experts to teach physics. We're moms that are lead learners that are trying to equip mamas and kids to learn this stuff at home. But we are as worried about their spiritual life as the science. We are as worried about equipping the mama and what might be struggles going on at home and helping them. We've got kids in all 4 of our communities in the area that range from on the spectrum, ADHD, processing disorders, you name it. And so kind of coming alongside, maybe I haven't had a kid with all those things, but as a director, I often will do some extra research. How can I help reach that kid in my classroom each and every week? What are some tools that I can, either even prayer, come alongside mamas, right? So we're very worried about the whole person, which I absolutely love.
And one thing with that, I did think about that. One of the struggles, I guess, for as a classroom teacher, it's your job to help the students be successful, but also have evidence of how they're successful in test scores and work samples and all of that. And it can be kind of selfish in a sense of like, I'm teaching these kids to benefit myself, and because I want the test scores to be great, so they need to be on my schedule. I'm going to rush them, I'm going to push them, and parents can sometimes lean that way too, to be, I want my child to be successful, I want to be the best of the best. And when you homeschool, you have to pace yourself, and I think it's a little bit of, and well, this is sort of the next thing too, but you have to pace yourself and know that 5 minutes of homeschooling is worth an hour of classroom work. But you also don't want to overwork your child and say, I don't care about anything else, but you just need to get your work done. You have to see the whole child because you're with them. It's a shared life. So from breakfast to dinner to bedtime, you're with them. And so really being able to say like, okay, I'm going to dedicate this time to being a teacher, but then I'm going to balance it being a mom. And that was probably the hardest thing for me because I thought I was missing out on being a mom. But it's that as I learned and as I parented my children, you love them and lead them and discipline them and nurture them at the same time. Sometimes you have to be more serious and task oriented, and then that'll allow you, if you do that task oriented time and making sure it's finished, then you can designate some time to just have fun and play games and play checkers. That was one of the ways I connected with Johnny, because it's important to play and to work, but you have to have a balance.
And you know my theory, I always say, if you squash the love of learning in your child, particularly when they're younger, that is far more detrimental than them getting, an F on a standardized test. I feel like our biggest job actually is to instill a love of learning in our kids. If they learn to love learning, it doesn't matter if it's the phone book or quantum physics. They are getting the tools of how to learn. They're going to enjoy doing it, and then they can do anything. But if you squash that love of learning when they're younger, it's really hard to bring them back from that. So other people probably have a different perspective, but that's kind of how you and I are very similar in that too.
Yes,
that's very cool.
Very much so. Yeah.
I want to talk about a lot of first-year homeschoolers, me included, maybe the first couple years. We often, especially, y'all are rare because both you and your husband were homeschooled for at least a portion. Most of us grew up in traditional schools, that I know anyways, and we all try to recreate the classroom at home. How did that go for you there, Lauren?
Okay, so yeah, I'll just tell you, the biggest conflict in my marriage was my husband saying, there's stuff everywhere, there's books everywhere, there's piles everywhere of curriculum. And I'll tell you this, be careful what you accept from people, because I had this very generous mom who finished homeschooling her child, called up my church and say, hey, are there any homeschool moms? And they said, Lauren Clemmer. She called me up, she came to my house, she brought me 6 boxes of new, pretty much gently used.
Did she reject any of them? No, because she's in love with curriculum.
Okay, so I kind of call myself the homeschool librarian because I have a lot of books. So I was really, also you're probably, starting out you're going to be given a lot of books, and because you don't want to buy everything, but you really do have to be selective and purposeful, and you're choosing your curriculum because it makes it more difficult, believe it or not, to take what people have given you for free and try to make it work. So just be careful and strategize.
Here's why she and I differ. And I love when people differ with me on the Lovecast, because it's really important to see different points of view, right? Lauren loves curriculum. I don't for youngers. And I say that because I'm not worried about what is in the book. Probably because I've already been through several of the challenge years and I know they're going to get a lot of it later. I'm more worried about them falling in love with learning. So I'm more worried about just getting a good decent reading curriculum. And I use the same reading curriculum for everybody and just tweak it, and math. And then we just do memory work until they hit essentials. She is extraordinary because she has customized all of her children's reading and spelling and yada, yada, yada programs that I didn't have the bandwidth for.
And not many people do. And I got a lot of feedback. Why are you making it harder than it is? But I kind of teach how I cook in a sense of it's kind of hard for me to use a recipe. I want to use what I have, and then a little of this and a little of that. And I find out what's not working and I want to change it. So instead of marinating it, I tend to fix it better. And I think each child that you have is going to have a different learning style, but yeah, so again, you have to find out what works for your family.
Yes.
To resolve,
we are going to be talking about curriculum on another podcast.
Yes.
So we're going to give you those details, but so curriculum, recreate in the classroom that first year.
So I'm still not arguing. My husband and I work through conflict. What's happened is we found one room for all the school stuff to go in. We still have a tiny bookshelf and other rooms in our house, but it's not everywhere. I didn't recreate. So far, my dining room has very little school stuff in it, except for a little prayer chart. And
But that's now. Your first
and my
couple
kids,
years, I knew you.
but children, my children were also younger, so I think like, oh, preschool, it has to look like this, but no, find a way to make it work, and you can have literally just a closet.
Yes.
And a couple of bins. You don't have to have.
She had like the
16
calendar and all of the little man.
It was a lot.
It was impressive.
So
I couldn't have done it.
More. So yeah. So after taking it from a person who's done that, it's all part of the process. You don't learn how to cook without experimenting, right?
Yes.
So experiment, but also learn from what you're doing. I guess perfect the recipe.
So what are some things that you've kind of learned along the way that I'm sure that you still implement certain things from the classroom, because there are great things about a classroom. We're not saying nothing in a classroom is good. What are some things you still kind of use that you were trained as a professional teacher to use? And what are some things you've learned that doesn't need to be in my homeschool house?
That's a great question. Well, I kind of think about the discipline of a classroom teacher, and everybody has to be on the same lesson at the same time and cooperating and quiet. And really, when I first came into a CC classroom, it's less about herding the sheep kind of thing, and it's more about the individual children having a voice. So instead of saying, shh, listen, it's let's all talk together. And that's the really important part. So as far as like the formalness of like, don't chew gum, don't wear a hat, it's okay if you wear your pajamas. Not after 9 o'clock, but until, on some days, so it's a little bit.
Some days I don't get out of my pajamas, Lauren.
I know. And then some days you sleep in, you don't do school. So as far as like, having that flexibility, but I think your original question was, what have I brought, what have I kept from my classroom?
I even remember early on you were very scheduled, and from 9 to 9:15 so practical things for mamas at home. If they only know a classroom and they're just now finding CC, what are some things that you would advise? Yeah, these are great things to implement, but some classroom things can,
Yeah, so the general, when I was a classroom teacher, we organized it by periods of the day, like 45 minutes to 50 minutes. So I guess that you had to be accountable to other people in the school as far as you had to finish at that time and you're moving on. So I think of it as at home in different blocks, which are flexible blocks. So the first block is Bible and breakfast. My grandmother used to say, no Bible, no breakfast. So we still hold to that, and memory work. So you just kind of think of things in order. I would say have a goal of time, general time, but then usually by 11 o'clock, my crew's like busting out of that schedule. So so think of blocks of time. So for instance, like the first block would be Bible, second block would be math, third block would be language arts, lunch, lots of like a little play break, and then the afternoon would be social studies and science for older kids.
I was about to say, this is where we differ. I don't do social studies in my house.
And then, and it varies, and then any writing in the afternoon. So as far as like, I think it would be helpful, so as far as having a formal outline, but I think too, in the beginning, it's good to plan the year. I wouldn't say plan the entire year, maybe the first 3 to 6 months, just a general idea of here are the books I'm going to use, this is how it can work out.
Okay.
It's probably not going to do that, but at least you've researched it and thought about it enough to figure out, okay, this, here's part of the plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you say for, because I know you've got some olders now, so you mentioned through lunchtime. For those of y'all that are just starting out and you've got preschool, 4-year-old, or you've got kindergarten, first grade, how long do they really need to be doing these things?
Oh yeah, okay, so it is really by age. So like,
I do 1 hour with my kindergartner. We're done.
Yeah, it's kind of like they typically say an hour per grade level, but I would say kind of, what is it? When they're 4, 20 minutes. When they're 5 and 6, maybe an hour, depending on
And your child. I've got one who
Yeah.
can't sit still for very long, and so a 20-minute chunk at 4 is pushing it for that one.
Well, and then 5 and 6, you do like a little bit here, and so a total of an hour, maybe. And then by 3rd grade, there's a big jump in my mind of their development, and then they're getting ready for essential. So you can spend 2 hours. And not all of that is direct instruction. So you're giving them a little workbook they can do independently so they can stay on task and be occupied and have that self-direction. I think that's important too, because you want to be able to get things done. Yep. Another thing is that I have hearing loss, and so with that, if there is so much going on and so much noise, I can't concentrate. And if you have, ADD, it's hard to concentrate. But in a sense of that's different in my house, in the way that I have to separate my children facing different directions away from me, because they're loud, right? So
so if you come from a public school background or a private school background or Christian, and you think that you wouldn't be able to do it successfully at home, you really can. And I think one thing too that you've always been so great at is she has a bunch of wisdom to share, and I'm still learning from her, but she's also very humble and goes to other moms before us, like the Michelle Rosens. And if you've got some moms in your community that's older kids, further along, asking what did or didn't work. And also too, always remember during these love casts that all of us have different personalities ourselves as the moms, and then our kids all have different personalities. So what works, some things we do the same, and some things Lauren and I do very differently, and that's okay. God made us all uniquely and wonderfully made, right? So
I will add a couple of things as far as if going back and so I was faced, so now I'm going to homeschool, and how am I going to do that? I had to do this sort of like, how am I supposed to do it? How should I do it? And then how am I able to, like, what are my limitations? What are my gifts? What are my strengths, weaknesses? And then make the plan. So you have to take all these, there's sort of that process you have to go through as an individual. Okay, what should I do? What can I do? What will I do? And so it's definitely possible. I mean, I think I've read several books on homeschooling, and the biggest thing was that the joy-filled homeschooler, she says that whatever you're most excited about, then you'll teach. And so whatever you're interested in, your children are going to want to learn about that. And it's by the enthusiasm that it's behind it, it's going to be interesting. Like I love more history. I never really felt like I learned enough of it in high school. And so teaching it to the children, it's come alive with a timeline song. And so they get it too. And they'll say, oh, my favorite subject is literature or my favorite subject is history. And that would be unheard of. They're like, typical children are like, I like PE, I like recess, which could be one of my children, but not all of them. So
yes. Back in the day too, we used to take whatever the kids were learning that week when ours were all younger. We would do library dates, and we'd go all the time to the library, and most kids don't want to read a dissertation on King James, right? We would go and we would find great, wonderful children's books that correspond with whatever we're doing at CC that week. It's free at the library, or we would, you can put a hold on it and pick it up later. So you can still make learning super fun without using tons of curriculum if that's not your jam. You can use CC as your base and just have your reading program and your math added on. Some people like to do extra, and that is absolutely fine. Have at it. I will say in general, once you get to essentials, which is 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, they're doing grammar and writing. That class was built for you to show up on day one having never diagrammed a sentence. You don't know what a subject and a verb is. So kind of goes back to, we've got another podcast coming up soon with Becca. We're going to talk about classical learning. We're going to go into the different stages, but you don't have to do it all. You think, oh, public school kids or private school, they're in a classroom for 6 hours. I need a 6-hour day. No, when she said earlier, 5 minutes one-on-one with your kid is probably about an hour of large classroom learning. That's no joke, because you're one-on-one, you know exactly what your kid is learning, and you go on your merry little way. You also know your kid's heart really, really well, and can pour into them. But so you've seen a lot of fruits. You would recommend people trying it.
Yes, as far as trying homeschooling in general, for sure. I mean, I think still my husband and I love CC all the way through high school, let's go. But we still take it reasonably year by year, if it's the best, if our kids are thriving, how are they doing. One thing you really have to be careful of, I think a couple of things is, and I didn't mention this earlier, but being a classroom teacher, you have a team of people working with you and helping you create it, and also in administration giving you the books and telling you what to do. That takes a lot of the load off. It's kind of like you just go with the current in the same direction as everyone else. In homeschooling, you're kind of swimming across stream and kind of going along. But with CC, you have a team of people working together and encouraging one another, giving you ideas, and you feel like you're not alone. But there is also that, not animosity, but curiosity and questioning of, is it legitimate to be a homeschool teacher? Is it the same thing? And even in some places that I go, I am discredited because I may have been a classroom teacher before, but now I'm a homeschool mom, and that's different. And so what you want to do is really pray about it, have a heart of gentleness, and they just don't understand. And that's okay. And everybody's going to do it differently. A lot of people will give you advice. A lot of people will ask you the questions of, are you still doing that, huh? And you can say yes, and it's going really well. And that's all you need to say. In the grocery store, people want to know your private business, and you can just give them a general insight.
Oh my goodness, the people, they will stop you and ask your kid, oh, you're homeschooled? Do you know who the president is? We love you too.
Yes.
But we are actually schooling our children at home.
So just be careful with, just as far as be secure in the Lord and develop your inner strength and your roots, because you're going to get a lot of questions. And because you are the teacher and you're with your spouse too, but the teacher in your classroom, you're going to have to just go with it, because your kids are going to try to distract you, and you just rapidly have to stay focused, and really relentless is the word I would use.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you.
That's a lot more to say, but...
Oh, I know, right? So part 2 is coming down soon. We'll talk about curriculum. Lauren's got a lot. She's tried a lot. She's got a lot of wisdom to share. So subscribe and like. Stay tuned for that. And while you're waiting for practicum to get more parent equipping for next year, wherever you are in the country, don't forget to CC with
Moxie.